Hello everybody, in today's video we're going to be going over a much colder pattern which is going to be taking over the western United States. We'll have a bunch of snow, especially in the interior west, where we'll have upwards of 2 to 3 feet in some of those higher elevations. We'll go over that towards the end of today's video. We'll have warmer conditions in the central and eastern United States, and then we'll have a bit of rain, especially for the mid-Atlantic and the southeast. So all of that will be covered in today's video. We have a ton of information. We're actually going to be going over some individual city forecasts for the Northwest regarding the temperature and also the precipitation. So we have a ton of new and interesting content to show you guys. So make sure you are subscribed and also make sure you have your notifications turned on. So here's the current National Weather Service page. We have some dense fog advisories in some parts of Michigan and Wisconsin, as well as Texas and Louisiana, and another area for Georgia and South Carolina. And then we have some air quality alerts in effect for Central California. Other than that, we don't have many other watches or warnings. Yesterday, we had a high temperature of 101 degrees in Death Valley, California, and also Santee, California. Again, both of them getting up to 101 degrees. The low temperature was 35 miles west-southwest of Choate, Montana, where they got down to 12 degrees Fahrenheit. And the highest rainfall report was in extreme southern Texas, in Brownsville, Texas, where they got 8.09 inches of rain. That's right along the border there in Texas. So those were the extremes from yesterday. We had no snowfall reports, although we did have a bit of snow in the Rockies, so we might have a couple of snow reports in tomorrow's video. Here's a look at the PNWA. So this is going to be something that's really going to be driving the pattern. If you don't know what the PNWA is, it stands for the Pacific North America Oscillation, and basically it covers the western half of North America, or the western third of North America, as well as the eastern Pacific, and it takes the upper air features of there, and it takes the upper air anomalies and just plots it on a graph, which makes it much easier to actually tell what's happening. Now, this is the GFS model. Yesterday we used the Euro model, and I was going to use it, but on second thought, the Euro only goes out 10 days, whereas this one will go out, I think, 16 days. So we'll get a little bit further out, and we'll at least get to have a general idea of what may happen a bit further along. When you're in a negative PNWA, that indicates that the temperatures are below normal, or in most scenarios, you have a bit more of a stormy pattern in the western United States. So that's what's happening right now. We're in a PNWA pattern that's 2 to even 4 standard deviations below the mean, and that is allowing so much colder temperatures to appear in the western U.S. and also into western Canada. One of the things that happens in a PNWA is that especially when it's in a negative PNWA, the eastern U.S. and the central U.S. will become much warmer. But in a positive PNWA, we have pretty much the opposite. We have much warmer conditions in the west and much colder conditions in the east. Especially, it usually gets amplified in the fall and winter months. So you're not going to hear me really talking about the PNWA in let's say August or July, because usually the oscillations are not really going to have too big of an impact on the pattern in that time period. So usually you're going to want to wait until fall or winter to really start to feel the effects of a PNWA. Some of that is just due to the actual average temperatures. So being a couple degrees below normal in January is going to feel much different to being a couple degrees below normal in August, just because it's much warmer in August. You're not really going to feel it. So usually these type of patterns will become much more prevalent in the fall and winter. And one thing, I've seen a lot of people saying that because this October is warm, that means that the entire winter will be warm, which I think is actually the opposite of what normally happens. Most years that are snowier and colder, we have a warmer fall, or at least a warmer part of the fall, normally in October and September, which we did have this year. And the reason that happens is because you have, let's say, a 5 or 6 week period, or even just 3 or 4 week period, where you have some colder temperatures in the west and vice versa in the east. Well, that's probably not going to stick around for too long. We have a fast-moving weather pattern, so within a matter of a couple of weeks, that will definitely change, and you'll probably see the opposite happen. So what you can see on this graph is that right now we're 2 standard deviations below the mean. We actually bottom out at around 4 standard deviations below the mean, but then ever past pretty much the 12th of October, so in a few more days, we're going to start to go up near that neutral line. Now, once we get to the neutral line, things will start to go a little bit more back to normal, so you'll have more of the fast-moving pattern. You have storms moving from east to west. You don't really have a defined weather pattern, and then I would kind of just speculate that if we're looking at the general trajectory of this line, that eventually that would go into the positive phase, probably by 1 or 2 or even 3 standard deviations. If that were to happen, that would really line up perfectly with November and early December. That could even linger past into late December, and that would indicate a colder pattern, and I think a lot of people would trade off a warmer October and early November for a colder mid and late November and December. At least I would do that, considering that I do like having some cold and snow, and I would really like to have a white Christmas where we have a little bit of snow on the ground, or at least a bit of a colder pattern. The past few have been a bit warmer in the eastern United States, so it would definitely be nice to have that weather pattern set up nicely for a colder and potentially snowier Christmas. But that's all speculation. Let's move on to the actual temperatures. These are the low temperatures, since we're going to be looking at how cold it will get in the western United States, and we're going to again mainly be focusing right over here. The eastern United States over this entire time frame will be quite warm, but again, having a warmer October really does not say a whole lot about the winter, considering that the weather pattern will pretty much flip-flop over the next couple of months. So you'll have 1 month that's cold, and the next one will probably be a bit warmer. That's really just how our weather in the United States works. So you can see it's not really that cold as we get into tomorrow. All that cold air is right north of the border into British Columbia and Alberta, and it's trying to squeeze into parts of Washington and Idaho, and trying to make its way down past the Canadian and U.S. border. So if we move this on, again, not a lot changes by Tuesday, but by Wednesday in the Pacific Northwest especially, you'll start to feel the effects of the colder temperatures. It's getting all the way into Northern California, so pretty much anywhere northwest of that black line I just drew is most likely seeing some colder temperatures, mainly in the higher elevations and the high desert of eastern Oregon, but also, some of those lower lying areas along the I-5 corridor, or also into areas of eastern Washington like Spokane, also dealing with some colder temperatures. So you're getting into the 40s, and also some some of the upper 30s, especially as you get higher up in elevation. Even into by Thursday, even in the lower lying areas, so Seattle, Portland, even eastern Washington, again, not in the higher elevations. That part of Washington is actually fairly flat until you get closer to Idaho, and then also until you get to the Cascades. So that area is actually pretty good for colder temperatures to kind of just pool in and kind of just sit there. So they will get in on some of the 30s as we get into Thursday. That'll probably be one of the colder days of next week, so probably going to need at least a jacket when you're going out in the morning on Thursday. If you look at for Friday, you're looking at pretty much exactly the same weather pattern. We're looking at 30s all across the board. Really does not matter where you are, even in the higher elevations. All of these spots getting in on some really chilly temperatures for this time of year. That's the mid and low 30s in kind of that white color, which you see spread across the northwest. If we look at for Saturday, which is October 9th, you can see that we're also dealing with 30s into the western United States, but it is starting to push away from the coastal areas. So now it's moving a little bit further inland. So if you live in the interior west, then you'll probably start to feel more impacts from the colder temperatures around that time. Now, there is the threat of some snow, and actually some sizable snow. And we'll talk about this a little bit more in a couple minutes, but there is a threat of some sizable snow in the Rockies and the interior west as we get around the 11th, 12th, and then into the Midwest, potentially for this area especially, as we get into next week after this one. So as we get into the week of the 11th and 12th is when you might have a little bit of action up in that area. We really don't know what's going to happen with that system, whether it just dies out over the Rockies or whether it can continue that push into the northern plains. If it does make that push into the northern plains, I'll have my snowfall forecast out. But again, it's just way too early for me to really speculate on that. And then if we look at for Sunday, you can see pretty much the same. We have 30s and even 20s in the higher elevations for the interior west, and those areas will continue to be rather chilly compared to normal in those areas over the next couple of days. So let's start looking at a few individual cities. I'll start off in Elko, Nevada, which is a medium-sized town in northeastern Nevada. It's really one of the bigger population centers in that part of the state, considering that especially once you get north of Las Vegas or once you get away from Reno, Nevada, there's not a lot of population in Nevada away from those two cities. So this is pretty much the next biggest city, I would say, with a couple others in northern Nevada. And you can see that we're actually going to be fairly warm, and if you look at the high temperatures, we're going to be in the 60s, 70s, so rather warm and nice in these spots. But it's really towards the tail end of this week and into early next week where we get into the much colder temperatures. So you're topping out into the 40s, the low 40s, even by next Tuesday. And you have low temperatures that are getting into the 30s or even maybe into the 20s. And again, it's still far out, over almost 10 days out, but you still want to kind of pay attention to that. We're not expecting too much precipitation over this time, but any precip that you do get will probably come in the form of snowfall, especially as you get later on into this time frame. If you look at this, the precipitation matches up perfectly with that day where you're going to have lows in the upper 20s. So if you put two and two together, that could indicate a little bit of snow for there. Let's look next at Boise, Idaho, and I have a few viewers from that area. It will be, again, fairly warm as we get into the early part of this week. So as we start off the work week, we're looking at temperatures in the 80s and the 70s. Even it gets a little bit chillier into the midweek part of this week, but you're still into the 60s. Very pleasant. You're dealing with low temperatures into the 50s. You have a couple days scattered in the 40s, but nothing crazy. And then it's towards the tail end when you might start to actually see a little bit of frost develop. Some of the lakes might start to have a little bit of a light freeze overnight. That'll probably melt during the daytime, but you're getting down into the 30s, the upper 30s in Boise, and that's in the city itself. So if you're looking at the suburbs, which tend to be a little bit colder because you don't have as much light pollution, you don't have a bunch of the city effects where you have some of the buildings and some of the factories putting off, making the city a little bit warmer than the surrounding areas. The heat island effect, once you get into the suburbs and especially into the more rural areas, you're not going to have that effect. So you'll actually be a few degrees colder than Boise itself. So even though we're looking at the city and the low temperature is 35, if you live outside the city, then you're probably right around 32 or 33 degrees. So you'll be a couple degrees below that. Here would be for Salt Lake City, Utah, and you guys are also going to start off the week quite warm, and that'll even extend into Thursday and Friday when you're still in the 60s, but once you get into Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday of next week, it really becomes much colder. You're dealing with low temperatures into the 30s and the low 40s. And again, this is for Salt Lake City itself. So in the city, but you get into the more rural areas or you get into the suburbs, and you'll probably be a couple degrees below what you see on the screen. Again, just because of that heat island effect. Once you get more urbanization, usually the temperature inside the city is a few degrees warmer than the surrounding spots. If we look at for Seattle, you guys will stay more moderate between the actual temperatures for this week, and that's partly due to the coastal effect. Once you're closer to the coast, you're not going to have huge temperature swings. That's why in the Midwest, for example, those areas can see temperatures in the summer get as high as 100 or 110 degrees, and in the wintertime they'll be as low as -30, -40 degrees, even in a few spots, and that's just because there's really nothing holding in the air masses. So there's nothing holding in that cold air, whereas along the coast you'll have the sea surface temperatures, which can regulate the temperatures a little bit more. So they're only in Seattle going to have high temperatures in the 50s, which is rather chilly for this time of year. But if you look at the low temperatures, look how close they are. So you're not seeing a huge spread in the high temperature and the low temperature. It's going to stay more close together. It'll be a closer high temperature compared to the low temperature. And if you look at Portland also in Oregon, you can see that they're going to have a bit warmer of a start of the week. But then as you get into the rest of the week, you'll be mainly in the 50s, between about 60 and 50 degrees, and then you're looking at the low temperatures, and with the exception of potentially just one day, you'll mostly be in the 40s for those spots, with potentially a little bit of rain around mid to late week this week. So if you look at the 6 to 10 day outlook, this is really shown well on this map. This is from the 8th through the 12th, and you can see that we're expecting some really cold temperatures for the western United States, and the complete opposite on the east side of the Rockies. So really, really warm for the central and eastern U.S. If we look at the 72-hour snowfall accumulation, so this is the past 72 hours, so this goes back through Thursday, and you can see that we have some of the snowfall amounts, especially in the higher elevations, that are getting up near 6 inches in some of the spots, maybe highest elevations above 6 inches, but really not too much. And I'm showing you this because over the next few days, we're actually going to see a lot more. And this is the forecasted snowfall map. Now, take this with a huge grain of salt because, again, this is 10 days out. Now, I'm mainly more interested in what's going to happen, not in the Rockies, but in the lower lying areas, not the mountainous parts of the Rockies. So for example, we did have on the previous European model run where it had kind of a big streak of snow in this area right here. Now, is that going to happen or is it not going to happen? That's one of the things that's kind of intriguing. This model run, you had that streak which went through pretty much the heart of Utah, Idaho, and Montana, where you had that big streak of snow. And if you were to look at the GFS model, which over the past couple of days has been showing quite a bit of snow, especially 10, 11, 12 days out in this part of the country, is that going to happen or is it not going to happen? Again, we still really don't know. Now, this ends on October 12th, this snowfall map. So we don't know really what's going to happen after that. And that's going to be one of the more interesting things to track. So if we do get any big snows, especially in the northern plains, the central plains, pretty much anywhere that's not a high elevation snowfall. So even if it is in the western United States, but it impacts some of those lower lying areas, I'll probably make a dedicated video on that with my snowfall forecast. So again, that is going to wrap it up for today's video. If you have any questions, please leave a comment down below. If you want a personal forecast, leave a comment down below as well, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.